Imagine waking up every morning knowing your life depends on a perfect shield wall and the guy standing right next to you. If he messes up, you die. If you're enjoying this so far, smash that like button. The history of the Roman soldier is way more than just the big battles you read about in books. It is a wild story of brutal discipline, unbreakable brotherhood, and a daily routine so intense it turned regular guys into unstoppable war machines. Today, we are going to step back in time and walk through a real day, hour by hour, in the life of a Roman soldier. The year is 117 AD. This is the absolute peak of the Roman Empire under Emperor Trajan, the exact moment when Rome had conquered more land than ever before. Stick around, because the hidden details of everyday life in ancient Rome will completely blow your mind. It was still pitch black outside when the camp hornblower blasted the first wake-up signal of the day. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. The Roman army was fighting on several different fronts all at the same time. They were guarding the borders of the Rhine and Danube rivers in Europe, keeping peace in the newly conquered lands of Dacia, and watching the Middle East territories Emperor Trajan had just taken from the Parthians. Let's look at a Roman soldier named Marcus Aurelius Verus. He is a fictional soldier, but his life represents exactly what thousands of real men went through. For Marcus, the day started the exact same way every single morning, 365 days a year. The permanent Roman military camp, called a castra, was basically a massive city. It was always built in the exact same rectangular shape, with inside streets laid out in a perfect grid, deep outside ditches, thick walls, and big gates on all four sides. When a full legion lived there, the camp held between 4,000 and 6,000 men. Marcus slept in a small barrack room shared with 7 other soldiers. This 8-man group was called a contubernium, the smallest social family in the Roman army. These 8 guys didn't just sleep in the same room. They ate all their meals together, did guard duty together, shared gear, and built a deep loyalty that lasted for decades. A historian named Vegetius wrote a famous military book in the late 4th century AD, proving the daily routine in these camps stayed the same for hundreds of years. You won't believe how strict this was. What Marcus went through in 117 AD was the exact same routine a soldier lived through under Julius Caesar 150 years earlier. Doing the same thing every day was a weapon itself. An army that practices the same moves daily doesn't have to stop and think in combat. They just act on pure instinct. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Marcus got out of bed. There was no staying in bed for a few extra minutes. Everyone knew what happened if you were late or lazy. But wait until you hear about the punishment. It was called the fustuarium, and it was absolutely brutal. The guilty soldier would literally be beaten by his own 7 roommates. The ancient historian Polybius wrote about this terrifying punishment in disturbing detail, noting that most men sentenced to this actually died. They rarely had to take things that far, but the threat of dying at the hands of your best friends was enough to make sure nobody ever slept in. Getting dressed for the day was a complicated technical process. The famous Roman armour, known as the lorica segmentata, was made of heavy, overlapping iron bands. It definitely wasn't something you could easily put on by yourself in the dark. Marcus actually needed a buddy to help adjust his back straps and make sure the heavy bronze clasps were locked tight. Underneath all that metal, he wore a thick wool tunic hanging down to his knees. He wrapped his legs in wool socks before slipping on his military sandals, called caligae. These were heavy-duty shoes with super-thick leather soles packed with iron nails. This gave soldiers incredible grip on any terrain and helped the shoes survive months of brutal marching. But wait until you hear about what went on their heads. Roman helmets, known as the galea or cassis, were serious feats of engineering. Made of solid iron or bronze, they had special side flaps to protect the cheekbones, plus a wide back rim to bounce enemy swords away from the neck. For everyday soldiers like Marcus, the top crest usually went sideways from ear to ear. But for officers, the crest held coloured plumes, and for centurions, it ran from front to back. This made them instantly easy to spot by their men, even in the absolute chaos of battle. If you're loving these crazy history details, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The Roman shield, known as the scutum, was another amazing piece of ancient tech. It was huge, rectangular, and slightly curved to perfectly wrap around the soldier's body. It measured about 80 centimeters wide and roughly 1 meter 20 high. It was built using thin layers of wood glued together in opposite directions, just like modern plywood. Then it was covered in tough animal leather and painted in the bright colours of their legion. The shield alone weighed between 5 and 6 kilograms. Add the heavy armour, the throwing spear called a pilum, and the short gladius sword, and Marcus was carrying up to 20 kilograms of gear before even grabbing his marching pack. You won't believe this next part, because a Roman soldier's diet is actually shocking. Most people imagine them feasting on huge chunks of meat, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Wheat was the absolute core of everything they ate. Each day, a soldier received about 800 grams to a kilogram of raw wheat. It was up to his small squad, the contubernium, to grind it themselves using tiny portable stone mills. Once ground into flour, they turned it into bucellatum, a rock-hard, dry biscuit that lasted for weeks. Or they boiled it into pulse, a thick, mushy porridge seasoned with salt, olive oil, and fresh herbs. But here's the crazy part historians recently discovered. At Vindolanda, a Roman fort in England from the 2nd century, experts found something mind-blowing. Buried in the wet, acidic dirt, they dug up the tabulae vindolandenses, tiny wooden tablets holding the actual daily mail of the soldiers. These preserved letters gave us exact grocery lists. They didn't just mention wheat and barley. They listed beer, watered-down wine, and posca, the official drink of the army. They also had olives, oil, cured cheese, eggs, salted fish, and occasionally pork or beef. For that time in history, the military diet was incredibly healthy and reasonably balanced. So, on that chilly morning in the year 117, Marcus sits down to eat his hot wheat pulse, drizzled with olive oil and a handful of salted olives. He bites into a chunk of hard cheese and washes it down with a cup of posca. Now, posca was just wine vinegar mixed with water, but it hid a secret superpower. Without knowing it, the Romans were drinking a daily mix with natural antibacterial properties. It killed nasty bugs in the water and stopped waterborne diseases. In a world with zero modern sanitary treatment, this accidental sour drink likely saved countless Roman lives. Meals were cooked over shared fires, set up right outside the barracks in designated camp areas. Each squad, or contubernium, had its own gear, including ceramic or iron pots, knives, wooden spoons, and mess tins. Cooking together was way more than just nutrition. It was a vital social ritual. The historian Polybius noted that soldiers who cooked and ate together built a mutual trust that translated directly into combat effectiveness. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. When the legion was on an active campaign, marching or in the field, feeding everyone became an industrial-scale logistics operation. A legion of 5,000 men chewed through 6 tons of wheat every single day, known as the annona militaris. To handle this, the military supply system used a network of administrative officials, regional depots, and contracts with local producers who guaranteed the food reached the fighting units. This system was so sophisticated that modern historians view it as a precursor to today's military logistics. If you are enjoying this, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you do not miss the next one. Training was not just something that happened at the start of a military career, it was a daily practice, without exception, during all their years of active service. This is one of the most distinctive features of the Roman army compared to practically all its contemporaries. Vegetius is very clear about this in his manual. He wrote that the Roman wins through hard work, where others succumb to heat or cold. Continuous training made the ordinary soldier an extraordinary warrior. But wait until you hear what they had to do. This philosophy turned into a physical exercise routine that started right after breakfast. It took up most of the mornings when the legion was not marching or in combat. Basic physical training meant running a full lap around the camp perimeter, which could reach 4 or 5 kilometers. They also practiced jumping in full equipment, swimming in nearby rivers, and long marches with a full load. The Vegetius documented the minimum requirement. Every soldier had to cover 24,000 Roman paces, about 35 kilometers, in 5 hours with full equipment. This was not an exceptional feat, it was the ordinary pace of Roman military marches. But the real heart of the training was the combat itself. Every morning, Marcus and his comrades spent hours fighting with practice weapons. But here is the crazy part. They used wooden swords, weighing twice as much as real swords, and woven wicker shields heavier than combat shields. This deliberate technique of training with heavier equipment was documented by Vegetius and was only rediscovered by modern sports psychology in the 20th century. When an athlete switches to real equipment in competition, he instantly feels more agile and precise. You will not believe how intense their drills were. The training targets were wooden stakes driven into the ground, called pallus. Each soldier had his own assigned stake and trained against it repeatedly. They practiced thrusting blows aimed at the throat and face, shield bashes to unbalance the opponent, side dodges, and fast advances. The gladius hispaniensis, the short, double-edged sword that became the standard legionary weapon, was designed for thrusts, not for slashing blows. This required a completely different technique from the long swords used by Germanic or Celtic barbarians. This technique had to be internalized until it became an automatic reflex. Throwing the heavy pilum spear was another skill they worked on obsessively. This spear, the pilum, was about 2 meters long. It had a wooden handle and a soft iron top that actually bent on impact. It was a genius design that did 2 amazing things at once. First, it punched right through enemy shields. Once it was stuck, the heavy weight and bent iron made the shield completely useless to carry. Second, it stopped the enemy from throwing it back. Because the iron was bent out of shape, it was impossible to throw with any good aim. Every single Roman soldier carried 2 of these spears into battle. Their training forced them to throw both super fast, one right after the other, just before crashing into the enemy line. Now this is where it gets really interesting. You have probably heard of the famous tortoise formation, right? They called it the testudo. The soldiers locked their shields together over their heads and along the sides, making a solid wall of wood and metal. They practiced this move over and over until they could snap into it in just a few seconds, no matter what was happening around them. Julius Caesar even wrote that his men formed this tortoise shape so incredibly fast that enemies just froze in pure shock. This was not some natural gift, but the result of hundreds of boring repetitions. By the way, if you are learning something new and enjoying this so far, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss the next one. Anyway, fighting was just one part of the job. They also went through hardcore training in field engineering. Every single Roman soldier was basically a part-time engineer. They knew how to dig deep trenches, put up huge wooden walls, and even fire big weapons like catapults. Caesar talked about how his regular troops built a massive wooden bridge all the way across the giant Rhine River in only 10 days. They just used wood they found nearby. No special builders were needed, just regular soldiers trained to do it all. But wait until you hear this next part, because it is one of the biggest secrets about a Roman soldier's life. Everything revolved around paperwork. The Roman army was a massive, highly organized machine, and every soldier had a part to play in it. A soldier like Marcus probably knew how to read and write pretty well. The army actually required new recruits to know basic reading and writing way back in the 2nd century BC. This was a mind-blowing rule in a world where almost nobody else knew how to read. They needed this because the military ran on endless documents. They had daily reports, weapon lists, food checks, letters home, work contracts, and pay records. You won't believe how they handled their money, though. Back in the days of Emperor Trajan, a regular soldier made 300 silver coins a year, paid out 3 times a year. But the army automatically took out money for their food, weapons, and clothes. This made the soldiers extremely angry, and we actually know this from old letters found hidden in the sands of Egypt and in forts in Britain. So, their take-home pay was pretty tiny. But there was a massive payoff at the end. After 25 long years of surviving all this, a soldier got an honourable discharge. They received a huge pile of cash equal to 12 whole years of pay. Plus, if they were an auxiliary or a non-citizen, they and their kids got full Roman citizenship for life. Inside the camp, there was also a main headquarters building. This is where they kept the legion's money, their sacred eagle flags, and all those endless paper records. If a soldier was really good at writing, he could get a cozy desk job in this office as a military clerk. This was an amazing gig because it paid extra money and got them out of the worst jobs, like digging ditches and construction. The camp always needed constant cleaning and fixing. Keeping things clean was a massive priority for the army. Not because it looked nice, but for purely practical reasons, to keep everyone from getting sick. When thousands of men live packed closely together, sickness is a massive threat. A bad outbreak of disease could wipe out an entire legion much faster than any enemy army ever could. Because of this, the Roman camp was built with health in mind. They had shared toilets with running water, public baths for the men to wash in, and clever drainage systems to make sure dirty water never pooled up. Marcus and his fellow soldiers had to take turns doing the dirty work. They dug fresh waste trenches, swept the walkways, and kept the toilets working perfectly. Now, this is where things get really intense. The way the Romans handled guard duty made them completely different from any other army at the time. Keeping the camp safe was a team effort, and messing up had deadly results. The day was split into 8 shifts of 3 hours each, 4 during the day and 4 at night. Every soldier had to stand guard at least once every 24 hours, and even more often if they were in enemy territory. An officer would walk around to check the posts, carrying a small wooden tablet called a tessera with a secret password. The password changed every single shift, and every guard had to say it perfectly when the officer showed up. But here is the truly terrifying part. The ancient historian Polybius tells us exactly what happened if a guard was caught sleeping on duty. The sleeping soldier would be subjected to a brutal group punishment, where he was beaten to death by the men in his own tent group. The logic behind this was cruel but incredibly effective. By making the whole group pay for the mistakes of one man, the Roman army created a perfect system of mutual surveillance. They did not even need extra supervisors because everyone watched each other, knowing one man's mistake meant death for them all. By the way, if you are enjoying these crazy historical details, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you do not miss the next part of the story. So, how did they know when to change the guard? They used a loud system of horns and trumpets. The men who played the curved horns and the ones who played the long, straight, tuba-like instruments used for formal events held highly specialized jobs in the legion. Every single command had a specific musical tune that everyone recognized instantly. There was one signal to change the guard, a different one to line up for battle, another to retreat, one to march forward, and one to charge. On a noisy battlefield, where you could not hear shouted orders a few feet away, this musical language was the only way to keep dozens of tactical units, made up of about 500 men each, moving perfectly together. You won't believe what happened outside the camp walls, though. It is easy to think a Roman soldier's life was nothing but fighting and strict rules, but history shows us a completely different and much richer picture. Permanent Roman camps, especially the ones that sat on the borders of the Rhine, the Danube, and in Britain for decades, actually grew into real towns called conabi. These lively civilian communities popped up naturally right outside the camp gates. They welcomed merchants, craftsmen, prostitutes, tavern owners, soldiers' families, and all the services needed to support thousands of men. Marcus, just like most career soldiers, likely had a long-term partner living out there. They lived together in a steady relationship, but she was not legally his wife. That is because Roman legionaries were actually not allowed to get legally married while they were on active duty. This strict rule lasted from the early Republic until Emperor Septimius Severus finally scrapped it in the year 197. It didn't stop soldiers from having serious long-term girlfriends, but it created massive legal headaches. Any kids born from these relationships were technically illegitimate until the father finally retired. But here is where camp life gets really interesting. Gambling was an absolute obsession for Roman soldiers. You could constantly hear dice rattling in the camp. Archaeologists have found these dice, mostly carved from bone or ivory, at almost every Roman site from Egypt to Scotland. They loved board games too. A strategy game similar to modern chess was hugely popular, and they placed heavy bets on javelin and wrestling matches. Gambling addiction was a recognized problem. The government passed several laws trying to ban betting between soldiers, but with very little success. Now, wait until you see how they relaxed. The camp bathhouse was the center of their social world. These were not just simple places to wash. The baths were where business deals went down, friendships were formed, and politics were debated. The routine started in the warm room, moved into the hot room with a heated pool, and finished with a shocking plunge into freezing cold water to tighten their pores. Civilians usually worked inside these baths, offering massages and applying sweet-smelling oils for a small fee. Real quick, if you are enjoying this deep dive, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Everything we just talked about only happened when the legion was stationed in a permanent camp. But the Roman army was always moving, and marching on a campaign was a completely different beast. When the legion marched, they carried everything needed to build a brand new camp. On top of his combat gear, every soldier carried a marching pack. This held wooden stakes for walls, digging tools, food rations for 3 days, and cooking pots. The total weight easily hit 40 kilograms. Because of this, the soldiers were nicknamed Marius's mules. This came from General Gaius Marius, who in the 2nd century before Christ forced his men to carry their own gear, reducing their need for slow baggage trains. The result was an army that moved insanely fast. A standard march covered 25 to 35 kilometers a day, and Caesar noted that in emergencies his legions marched 50 kilometers in a single day. But here is the crazy part. What happened when they finally met the enemy? The reality of a Roman battle, seen through the eyes of a regular soldier, was much more chaotic, noisy, sickening, and terrifying than any movie can show. Before combat, the men performed group rituals, animal sacrifices, and prayers to Mars and the specific gods of the army. Priests watched the behavior of birds and inspected the guts of sacrificed animals to see if the omens were good. This wasn't empty superstition. It was a psychological trick that built team spirit and reduced individual fear, making each soldier feel like the gods were fighting beside them. The basic Roman formation was 3 staggered lines. The newest fighters stood in the front, experienced men in the middle, and the veterans in the rear guard. Each line served as a fresh backup for the men right in front of them. By the year 117 AD, this setup had changed slightly, but the main idea stayed the same. Deep lines meant fresh fighters could constantly step up to replace tired ones. This kept the pressure on the enemy without wearing out any single group. But here is the crazy part about what happened right before the fighting started. Veterans describe this moment as a state of extreme focus, where fear turned into a feeling almost like being numb. The ancient writer Livy mentioned soldiers who didn't even feel terrible wounds in the heat of the fight, only noticing them hours later. Today, modern brain science gives us a clear answer. The body's stress response pumps out hormones that temporarily block out pain. But for Marcus and his friends, it was just the brutal reality of war. If you are enjoying this so far, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Now, this is where things get really intense. The attack kicked off with the Romans throwing their heavy spears, the pila. Every soldier carried 2. After throwing them, they made a sprint of 15 to 20 meters straight at the enemy. Then came the massive crash of the shields. The Roman shield slammed into the enemy with the full weight of the soldier behind it. The goal wasn't to kill right away. They wanted to knock the enemy off balance, force a step back, and open a small gap. That tiny space was all they needed for a deadly thrust of their short sword. You won't believe what happened next with their senses. The smell of a Roman battlefield was something survivors could never forget. It was a thick mix of blood, sweat, and human waste. In the pure terror of fighting, many men lost control of their bodies. Add in torch smoke, the scent of iron, and the smell of fresh wounds under the hot sun. The noise was absolutely deafening. It was a chaotic mix of war cries, clashing metal, groans of wounded men, screamed orders, and sharp blasts of horns cutting through the madness. But wait until you hear how the leaders handled this. Centurions were middle-rank officers leading groups of 80 men, acting as the true nervous system of the Roman army. They didn't hide in the back. Instead, they stood at the far right side of their units, the most dangerous spot on the battlefield. They fought right next to their men. This created an amazing bond of trust between commanders and soldiers. But it also meant huge numbers of centurions died in combat. Polybius noted that the army didn't pick centurions just for flashy bravery. They looked for a specific mix of physical toughness and emotional control. They needed men who kept a completely cool head under extreme pressure. Now, you might be wondering how long a man endured this life. Military service lasted 25 years. After Emperor Augustus changed the rules, joining became a formal contract with a clear start date and guaranteed rewards. Most guys joined between 18 and 22 years old, meaning a soldier like Marcus would fight into his 40s. In the ancient world, that was considered an older man. But throughout this long career, there were chances to move up. A regular soldier could become an immunis, skipping the worst chores because they had skills like medicine, carpentry, or writing. Above them was the princeps, a junior officer with extra pay, and at the top were the centurions, who made 15 times more money than an average soldier. But here is the crazy part about being a top soldier. For extreme bravery in battle, you could earn the corona civica. This oak wreath was given to soldiers who saved a fellow Roman citizen during a fight. The corona moralis was a special prize for the first man brave enough to climb over an enemy city's walls. Along with these wreaths, heroes received neck rings, bracelets, and shiny metal discs called phalerae to wear on their armor during big parades. If you're enjoying this so far, smash that like button. Now, you won't believe what happens next when we talk about getting hurt in battle. War wounds were just a normal part of a long military career. Because of this, Roman army doctors, known as medici, were the most skilled health workers in the ancient world. They saw so many injuries that they became true experts. Archaeologists have dug up their advanced medical kits, finding tweezers, scalpels, tools to pull out arrows, and needles for stitching cuts. They even used wine to clean wounds, honey to speed up healing, and wooden splints to hold broken bones in place. But wait until you hear about what happened when a soldier finally left the army. Retiring as a legionary was a massive life change. After 25 years of living by strict military rules, a veteran was handed a pile of cash and often a plot of land in a Roman colony. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. These veteran towns, like Cologne in Germany or Merida in Spain, were not just random gifts. They were clever tools to spread Roman ways. By placing veterans in conquered lands, Rome built strong centres of their culture and language across the world. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. After looking at a full day in the life of a Roman soldier in the year 117, a big question pops up. Why are we still so fascinated by the Roman army 2,000 years later? The answer lies in how massive and reliable they were. For over 5 centuries, this army was the most organized, disciplined, and professional fighting force in the Western world. They fought huge battles, from Zama against Carthage in 202 BC to Trajan's wars against the Dacians between 101 and 106. Regular legionaries like Marcus were the ones transforming the world. You probably didn't know this, but the cities that started as Roman army camps grew into some of the biggest metropolises in modern Europe. The roads, aqueducts, and local governments they set up left physical traces we can still see in archaeological digs and city layouts today. Even the simple Latin these soldiers spoke in camp, the Sermo Castrensis, is the direct ancestor of Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian. Which one surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. Ultimately, telling the Roman Empire's history through these soldiers is a profoundly human story. It shows what people can endure, build, and destroy when organized by a powerful collective goal. A regular guy like Marcus Aurelius Verus didn't think about his civilizational legacy. He just worried about his morning wheat, his night guard duty, and the comrades by his side in formation. Yet the sum of thousands of these days, lived by millions of men over centuries, built something we have not yet finished understanding fully. Ancient Rome was really just a massive human story. Every time we dig up an old ruin, read a faded letter on a scrap of paper, or study how a military camp was built, we are bringing a piece of that story back to life. We give a voice back to the regular guys who walked, fought, ate, and laughed together. These are the same men whose daily habits still shape the world we live in right now. If you are still watching, you officially know more about the true, gritty life of a Roman soldier than most people who actually study history. But here is the real question I have for you about the 10 things we looked at today. We covered waking up in the freezing dark, eating nothing but grain, endless training, doing boring paperwork, pulling long guard duties, hanging out in camp, surviving awful marches, fighting bloody battles, moving up the ranks, and leaving a lasting legacy. Which one shocked you the most? Drop your answer in the comments right now. If you loved this deep dive into the past, smash that like button and hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Every week, we uncover hidden stories that textbooks completely left out. Next time, we explore exactly how the women of Rome survived in a tough world controlled by the soldiers we just talked about. Their voices are finally ready to echo through time.